Okay, guys, so welcome back. This will be session 14 in our general introduction to apologetics. We're still dealing with questions and objections to the New Testament. And I just put this up on here on the screen for you. If you go to our website, newlifesanctuarychurch.com, and you go to Equip You Year 1, Class 22, Part 2, get all that? Class 22, Part 2, Chronology of Resurrection Events, and that's where let's see if there it is. If you go to the notes, you get a PDF there. Should pop up. All about what we just covered, basically, in PDF form, so that you don't have to try to memorize everything we just covered, because that's impossible. And you can critique it, think about it. Maybe you've got a better way to reconcile all that data that you see there in the New Testament concerning the resurrection of Jesus. But I just want you to have that, okay? So here we are, we're looking at this next major objection, and this is that Jesus was never even a real person, never existed. Very few scholars think this, but there's a few, and at a popular level, this is gaining traction. This is the idea that the Christ of the New Testament is really just an invention. He's based on Egyptian and pagan mythology. The Zeitgeist movie that came out a few years back claims that Jesus was an invention based on the Egyptian myth of Horus, this god Horus. And so here's some of their claimed parallels, at least that movie presents. They say Horus and Jesus are both called Son of God, both virgin born, on December 25th, visit of three wise men. They're claimed to have disciples, did miracles, was crucified and resurrected. Now, if I can just, even websites like the Internet Infidels look at some of this and say some of this is very hard to validate, very hard to confirm historically. But anyway, the idea here is that there's a whole long list of Christs, so-called Messiah figures or Savior figures, that has appeared in religious systems for thousands of years, and Jesus is just the latest in a long list of Christ myths. And according to the Zeitgeist movie, it begins with Horus, the Egyptian god Horus. Now, where is any of this information even coming from? How do we know anything about Horus? According to the Larousse Encyclopedia of Mythology, it says this: it may seem strange to suggest that the religion of ancient Egypt is very imperfectly known to us. Such is the case. We hardly know anything about the religions of Egypt. We understand little of their nature, and seldom do we know even the legends concerning them. The full stories themselves, however, are almost never set down. Only the Osiris myth, and this is what we're talking about, Osiris, Horus, together in this myth called the Osiris myth. One of the greatest gods of the Egyptian pantheon has been transmitted in detail by Plutarch. Plutarch's the guy that gives us this information. He was a priest of Apollo, lived from 46 to 120 AD. He constantly identified Horus with Apollo, his chosen god. So if we want to know what Egyptian mythology was all about concerning the Horus myth, the Osiris myth, we have to go to Plutarch, who identified his chosen god Apollo with Horus. Now, is he a reliable source? I kind of don't think so. Plutarch occasionally fabricated similarities between famous Greeks and Romans in order to write parallel biographies. That we know. He's not exactly the most reliable person. The World Book Encyclopedia states that in Plutarch's lives that the comparisons are often forced. He's not the most reliable biographer, and notice that he does live after Jesus was born. He comes into the world after Christianity is already established. For many years, Plutarch serves as one of the two priests at the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, the famous site of the Delphic oracle, 20 miles from his home. So there's Delphi, there's Corinth. Paul brought Christianity to Corinth when Plutarch was about 10 years old, 51 AD. So if there's any parallels to be drawn between these two religious systems, it may not be Christianity that's ripping off the Osiris myth. It might be that Plutarch is fabricating things that he may be fabricating things, and he may be outright drawing or plagiarizing from Christianity. Okay? Yes, it's true, there's an Egyptian myth of Osiris and Horus and all that predates Jesus, but the information we get about this comes from Plutarch, who comes after Jesus. And in fact, the Horus myth is, I think, pretty dissimilar to the gospel accounts of Jesus. According to the encyclopedia, we find in the Egyptian pantheon something like 20 Horuses. The myth that I think that people are talking about, described here in the World Book Encyclopedia, it says Osiris was the chief god of the underworld among the ancient Egyptians. He was worshipped in many temples of Egypt. Osiris was the prince of the dead. He ruled the underworld of the tomb, which was populated by the souls of the dead. Egyptians believed that when they died, they became Osiris. Osiris was the husband of Isis and the father of Horus. His brother was Set, who represented evil. According to a tradition, Set tricked Osiris into getting into a box and then threw it into the Nile River. Isis found the box, but Set stole the body and cut it into 14 pieces. Isis found Osiris's body and brought it back to Egypt, where Horus was born. Horus avenged Osiris's death by defeating Set and his followers. Osiris was given new life. See, this is supposed to be a resurrection here, according to the critics, right? He then ceased to be king of this world and became king of the underworld. Thus, the idea of resurrection became the central theme of the worship of Osiris. Osiris is often represented in art as a mummy wearing the crown of Upper Egypt on his head. What's happening here? You have this very strange pagan myth, very, very shadowy details that look anything like the story of Jesus. Yes, you have somebody defeating the forces of darkness. You have a kind of resurrection, perhaps. He becomes Lord of the underworld. I mean, that doesn't sound anything like the physical resurrection of Jesus into the world. I'll just direct you to a book by N.T. Wright, if you're interested. It's a 600 or 700 page volume called The Resurrection of the Son of God. 600 pages of that book, or between 500 and 600 pages, is all donated to the concept of resurrection in the ancient world. Nobody was looking forward to a physical, actual, corporeal resurrection. All these stories are symbolic, or they're spiritual, or they're just analogs for what nature is doing in terms of the procession of the seasons. The world seems to die at wintertime, it comes back to life in the springtime, and we make myths around this. And our myths have, the seasons seem to be personified. The Osiris myth is a myth like that. But really nothing in common with Christianity. But what the skeptics are doing, they're taking these ancient myths and they're describing them in Christian terms. So they talk about resurrection, in which there really is no, describing a myth, it really does not talk about resurrection at all, but they're putting the word resurrection there. And you're going to see that with the Mithraism as well. Myths hide themselves behind obscurity. The Osiris myth speaks of things that happened long ago and far away. You can't check any of these details. And that's how fairy tales begin, once upon a time. The Gospels are nothing like that. In Luke chapter 3, you get precise chronological markers. Who are the men in power? Who is ruling what regions? Details you can check. Prominent names show up in the New Testament. Joseph of Arimathea, prominent council member. Gamaliel, prominent Jewish rabbi. Herod the Great, Herod Antipas, Herod Agrippa. Erastus, the city treasurer in Corinth. Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate, John the Baptist, Caiaphas, high priest, Sergius Paulus, proconsul of Cyprus, and Gallio, the proconsul of Corinth. This is not obscure. Precise details, geopolitical divisions, chronological markers, names and titles of rulers that you can check. Non-Christian sources corroborating some of this. Thallus possibly believes it's Samaritan from AD 52. Josephus, Tacitus, Pliny, Lucian, the Talmud. We could add to that Marabar Serapian's letter. This is quite different than these myths. The Encyclopedia Britannica says this: these independent accounts prove that in ancient times even the opponents of Christianity never doubted the historicity of Jesus, which was disputed for the first time and on inadequate grounds by several authors at the end of the 18th, during the 19th, and at the beginning of the 20th centuries. So according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, there is no good reason to think that Jesus is just a figment of the imagination, or that he is just a mythological construct borrowed from pagan mythology. That was proposed first in the 18th century, and it was thoroughly discredited. Now the claim here that the details of Christ's life, like virgin birth, December 25th birthday, a visit by 3 kings, and so on, this is supposed to be evidence that Christianity is simply another pagan myth whose ultimate origin lay in Egyptian astrological religion. Now this is something we've heard. It came out in the Zeitgeist movie and other popular level websites and so on. The answer to this is that Christians have paganized Christianity, and or we might say they've Christianized paganism. This got started with Constantine. I think it also shows up pre-Constantine as well, beginning around 280 AD with the hermit monk St. Anthony and others that followed in his tradition. There was definitely borrowing religious practice from the East. It made its way into monastic Christianity. If you get Alexander Hislop's book, The Two Babylons, it's in the public domain now. You can get it online, or you can order it hard copy. He clearly shows pagan influence upon the Roman Catholic Church, and Christianity soon became an amalgam of the true faith and what we might call godless paganism. And so, like, for example, the December 25th birthday for Jesus, the Bible doesn't give you that. And yet December 25th was a high holiday on the pagan calendar. The Bible nowhere states that 3 wise men came to visit the baby Jesus either. We're told that multiple wise men came. There's a plurality of these guys, but we don't know there's only 3. And the Christmas tree is not seen in the Bible, and I think that has everything to do with the pagan deity Attis. But this is sort of just become incorporated. So if you're seeing parallels between Christianity and paganism, what kind of Christianity are you looking at here exactly? I want to say that a real Christianity is rooted in Judaism. There's a certain Jewishness to the Christian faith. Egyptian is a pagan nation. And I think we can just summarily reject the idea that Christianity is linked with Egyptian mythology. First of all, in the Old Testament, God mandated a clear distinction between Israel and her pagan neighbors. That includes Egypt. All godly men distance themselves from Egypt. That is very clear in the Old Testament. Even when Egypt was harboring Israel in the days before they became slaves, they were segregated in the land of Goshen. And then certainly after they became enslaved, there was a distinction to be made between Egypt and Israel. The prophet Jeremiah, who ministered 600 years before Christ, was warned very clearly, do not seek the help of Egypt. Don't learn the way of the heathen. And you remember the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah, a prophecy against Pharaoh Necho. Don't seek help from that guy. And in fact, all of chapter 46 of Jeremiah's prophecy is a warning of judgment coming against Egypt. Remember, it was Pharaoh Necho that killed godly King Josiah. You know, they were not to learn the way of the heathen. On and on and on, the Old Testament warns us about that. So this idea that Christianity is born out of paganism makes no sense. Christianity is rooted very clearly in Judaism, biblical Judaism. I've heard this, the Jehovah's Witnesses actually argue like this, that mainstream Christianity, with its symbol of the cross, is completely pagan, that the cross is a purely pagan symbol, phallic symbol, sometimes they want to say. And yet, The Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus died on a torture stake, a straight pole. It looks a lot like an obelisk, which is a phallic symbol. I mean, this is ridiculous. What kind of charge is this? That the cross, the T-shaped cross, is a phallic symbol, but not the straight pole that resembles the obelisk. The Bible tells us that Christ's hands and feet were pierced 1,000 years before his crucifixion. Remember, in Matthew 27, it says that Jesus had the charges against him nailed to the cross above his head. You can't be nailed on a torture stake, hands over head, and have the charges against you nailed to a cross above your head. It would be above your hands. Okay? In fact, like the JW say, he's nailed like this, with one nail going between both wrists, going through both wrists. And yet we read it in John 20. Thomas said, I want to see the print of the nails, plural. Okay, obviously Jesus was crucified on a T-shaped cross, arms outstretched. And this fulfilled prophecy in the Old Testament, not in some pagan religious system, but in the Old Testament. Jesus Christ is our Passover. He's called our Passover Lamb. Going back again to the Old Testament, 1,400 years before Jesus was born, the Passover ordinance in Egypt. God told Israel, there will be a real distinction between you and Egypt. You're going to paint the blood of the lamb on your doorposts and on the lintel. And you can see a shadow of Christ's cross there. Doorpost, lintel, red with blood. The unleavened bread which was to be eaten speaks of Jesus. The unleavened bread, when you take a look at that matzah bread, what does it look like to you? It looks like it's been striped and bruised, and it gets broken, and you just see Jesus Christ, the bread of life there. Don't you see that? And so we have a communion meal that looks back to Christ, our Passover, slain for us, that unleavened bread broken for us, and the lamb slain and its blood applied, reminiscent of the cross, so that Christ would pass over us for judgment. Now, some want to say that whole issue there, the whole communion meal and the Savior figure whose blood is spilt and so on, this is Mithraism, which came to the Roman Empire somewhere around 70 years before Christ or something like this, 60, 70 years before Christ, which was Christianity's chief competitor, Mithraism, in which they would slay a bull and they would let that bull's blood splash all over them and all this kind of stuff, a cleansing ritual of sorts. And they apparently saw Mithra, their god, as a savior figure, and they saw a resurrection there, and they had a communion meal. But all this is very hard to verify. And even if it were true, this communion meal that includes bread and wine does not go back to Mithraism. It goes back 2,000 years before Christ to the days of Abraham. Again, Christianity is rooted in the Old Testament, not in pagan religious systems. You remember, Abraham encounters a man named Melchizedek, priest of the Most High God, and there he has a communion meal with Abraham, a kind of communion meal. He brings out the bread and the wine. The bread and the wine are linked with priesthood 2,000 years before Jesus comes into the world, long before Mithraism. So if there's a parallel here, it's between Jesus, his communion meal, and the Passover, and the bread and the wine linked to priesthood way back in the days of Abraham. If there's a religious system that's ripping off somebody around here, I think that Christianity is the one being ripped off. It's religious systems borrowing from Christianity. Okay, you with me on that still? You still with me, guys? Okay. Many other Christs have been worshipped by ancient cultures: Mithra, Zoroaster, Attis, Horus, Krishna, and many, many others. I think oftentimes the parallels are forced, but even if they are legitimate, I think this all can be accounted for by the fact that we all do have a common heritage back to Adam, and back to the garden, and back to Noah. Adam and Eve were placed in a paradise. They were given a command not to eat of the tree. They ate of the tree at Satan's insistence. He came to the woman first. She ate. Then she gave to her husband. He ate. Sin entered the world. And God had some words of judgment to say here after sin entered the world. He told the serpent, empowered as he was by Satan and manipulated as he was by Satan, he said, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between her seed, your seed and her seed. He, that's the woman's seed, shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. And of course, we look at that and we see resurrection there. We see Jesus, his crucifixion, resurrection, a bruising of Christ's heel, momentary physical death, but a crushing of Satan's head when he was defeated completely at the cross, which soon will one day be empirically realized when Jesus returns. Adam understood this. Adam did get this. He called his wife Eve because she was mother of the living. Death had just been pronounced on Adam. Adam, from the dust you were taken, from the dust you're going back to the dust. And yet Adam, thinking back to the prophecy of Genesis 3:15, said, okay, Eve, your name is Eve now because you're the mother of the living. I know that the seed is coming through you and will defeat the forces of darkness. In Genesis 4, the first child is born to this couple, and Eve says this. She says, I have gotten a man from the Lord. If you look at the Hebrew, literally she says this, I have gotten a man, the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel. I asked my friend Menno Kalischer, does this Hebrew here allow for the interpretation that when Eve brought forth Cain, and she makes this statement, I've gotten a man, the Lord, did she see possibly Cain as the promised seed? And Menno said, yes, that's very possible. That is very likely. So I'm just saying, throughout history, people have this common heritage. I mean, all cultures around the world can trace their heritage back to Adam and Eve and this promise that was made. There is a Savior coming, and most cultures around the world are dimly aware of it today, even today. So I would say religions that aren't outright rip-offs of Christianity can easily be explained by our common history from the Garden of Eden to Babel, to the Tower of Babel. We have all this in common. We remember the promises made concerning the coming seed. And I think competing religious systems have their own versions of that coming seed, like perhaps Krishna and name them all. Okay, so that's some information there on that. Any questions on
about Plutarch?
Yeah.
I've read some of his biographies or whatever.
Yeah.
He's considered a decent historian or whatever. People look at his stuff and say, okay, this is kind of what we know about these people.
Right.
But he does have a little bit of he kind of fits his stories into something that he kind of makes a point with each one, and he wants things to fit. So where's his standing in historical, like you're saying that people call into question his takes on Egyptian myths, which makes sense, but
right.
even of the history of his own day, how credible?
I think I made the point, people call into question the legitimacy of the parallels he draws between famous Greeks and Romans. They say some of this is pretty forced.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying he's completely untrustworthy 100%. I am saying, though, he's a priest of Apollo, and Apollo is identified with the Egyptian Horus. So he's going to try to paint these figures in the best light possible.
Yeah,
okay?
He seems to do that.
And he seems to do that. And again, when you're trying to show the legitimacy of your religion, you're going to want to make your religion look as old as possible too, right? And I did want to bring out the point that he comes on the scene after Christianity is well established in that part of the world.
Yeah.
Okay? So I'm saying if there's borrowing going on here, more likely that the pagans are borrowing from Christians.
Yeah.
All things being equal, if there's borrowing, I think it's going in that direction.
Because most of the stuff he wrote was not eyewitness accounts,
right?
But either things he heard or things he created from what he heard.
Right. Okay, so I'll just give you one more word on the pagan myth hypothesis, and this comes from Bart Ehrman, who is no friend to conservative evangelical Christianity. He's an atheist, a historical New Testament scholar who's an atheist. But he says this, and I'm quoting, can I just say this? Bart Ehrman is a very well-respected scholar. He is not out there on the fringe somewhere. He is right at the center of mainstream New Testament scholarship in many ways. He says this current craze that Christianity was a mystery religion like these other mystery religions, the people who are saying this are almost always people who know nothing about the mystery religions. They've read a few popular books, but they're not scholars of mystery religions. The reality is we know very little about mystery religions. The whole point of mystery religions is that they're secret. So I think it's crazy to build on ignorance in order to make a claim like this. I think the evidence is just so overwhelming that Jesus existed that it's silly to talk about him not existing. I don't know anyone who is a responsible historian, who is actually trained in the historical method, or anybody that is a biblical scholar who does this for a living, who gives any credence at all to any of this. And that's Bart Ehrman's take on the matter here. And he's sort of a hostile witness. He doesn't want to give ammunition to the conservative Christian, evangelical Christian, who sees Jesus as the divine Son of God and the Bible as inerrant, and yet he has absolutely no time for the pagan myth hypothesis. And it's really kind of funny. I had an encounter with the humanists and agnostics and atheists of Manitoba at one of their at the Corn and Apple Festival in Morton, and they had these books out on the table, and they had Bart Ehrman's book Misquoting Jesus there. And so we're going on, and they're saying, well, Jesus probably never even existed, and there's all this evidence to show he's just pagan myth and blah blah blah. And I said, you guys, you got Bart Ehrman's book sitting right there, and Bart Ehrman says it's silly to talk like that. And basically it just comes out, anything that's against Christianity is good enough for these guys. If it comes against Christianity, we'll take it. Even if our sources are in conflict with themselves, it doesn't matter. We'll just give everything out there and try to come against Christianity in some way, shape, or form. But very quickly, I just want to move now to this idea that we have some Gnostic Gospels. And they might be better sources of information concerning Jesus. Now, who's ever heard of the Gnostics before? Gnostics, they were Christianity's pretty much chief religious competitors in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries. And the Gospel of Judas is an ancient text that was discovered. That's a Gnostic gospel. And this is just part of a presentation that I gave some time ago where I show that, you know what a boomerang is, right? You launch a boomerang, and if you're not paying attention, it might come back and hit you. And I think the Gospel of Judas, all the hype about the Gospel of Judas is actually a boomerang that comes back and hits the New Testament critic, the skeptic. This lost Judas Gospel, it is very ancient. But according to this translation of this Coptic Gospel, it says, here's a book that turns the theology of traditional Christianity on its head and reverses everything we ever thought about the nature of Christianity. So this gospel was discovered in Egypt. I think it was back like in 1978 or something. And then reconstructed, put together, and then translated. And you can go to the library and read the translation and read what it has to say. The Gospel of Judas is definitely Gnostic. Okay, now what's Gnosticism? Gnosticism is a dualist view of reality. It is a dualist view of reality. So for the Gnostic, like the Neoplatonist, the spirit is good, the flesh is evil. Matter is evil, spirit is good. The idea is you have this ultimate reality that's all spirit, and spirit would never create matter, because matter is vulgar and corrupt and imperfect. But you have these emanations from ultimate spirit, ultimate reality, emanations, beings being emanated, until you get to this lowest emanation, which creates matter. And because the Jewish God of the Old Testament is the creator, He is seen in Gnosticism as a fool. He is seen as a wicked fool. He is trying to create what he is dimly aware of in terms of perfection, but of course he can't do it with matter. And so the true God is the creator, and therefore he's not the true God. He is not ultimate reality. And so Gnosticism, in the nature of the case, is anti-Jewish. Gnosticism is anti-Jewish. The goal in Gnosticism is to escape your material jail called your body. This is Platonism. This is Neoplatonism. Let's get out of here. We need to free the spirit from matter. And once you've done that, that's salvation. You've been saved. And if you want to be saved, it takes knowledge. You need to have special knowledge of what you really, really are. So knowledge is salvation. You need to know the truth about God, about ultimate reality, truth about yourself and the cosmos. That's why it's called Gnosticism. Gnosis, knowledge in Greek. Special secret knowledge leads to salvation. You see this in Eastern religious systems, like Hinduism, for example. This is all Eastern. It made its way to Egypt, and it's just all Eastern. And it bled its way into the early church. The monastic orders began to adopt Eastern meditative practices in order to feel this sense of oneness with reality, oneness with God. It's all coming back today too. The Gnostic Empire Strikes Back. There's a book by that title out there. So in the Eastern tradition, all is one. According to some schools of Hinduism, all is one. Monism, all is one. Your problem is that you don't realize that. You are divine. You're under this delusion that you're a finite creature with a physical body. And so you meditate and you get enlightened to the fact that you are divine. And once you've become enlightened to that fact, you don't come back again when you die. You're not reincarnated. They call this samsara in Hinduism. You just keep coming back to live another life. Just keep coming back. Once you realize that you are divine and you're one with the whole created order, or I should say the whole divine order, then you've achieved enlightenment or moksha, and you don't come back. And that sounds very much Gnostic, or not. We should say Gnosticism sounds very Eastern religious. Okay, so it all comes down to knowledge. And in the Gospel of Judas, Judas wants to tell us that some people have a divine spark. Jesus had it in a special way, and Judas had it as well. And in the Gospel of Judas, the other disciples are all a bunch of fools. They don't know the truth about reality. They don't understand who Jesus is. Only Judas, he's the good guy. Only Judas really knows what's going on around here. And in the Judas Gospel, there's a prediction about the mainstream church, mainstream Christianity is going to come on the scene. Prediction about this, because Judas is written much after. Judas is maybe 2nd, 3rd century. But it's pretending to be a gospel written by Judas, see? So it's pretending to be 1st century. No one thinks it's 1st century. But anyway, there's this prediction that the Orthodox Church is coming, and they're going to have like a communion meal, and they're going to have all these rituals and observances and doctrines, and of course they're all wrong, because only Judas has the truth about ultimate reality. Judas betrays Jesus at his insistence, according to this gospel. This freed Jesus from his physical constraints. Jesus did not come to save us from the penalty of sin, but ignorance. And so reconciliation to God is not the goal. The Old Testament God is seen as a bloodthirsty rebel. So it's all very, very anti-Jewish. It's anti-Old Testament. And so what I can do here, just in our last remaining moments, I'll just, instead of exploring this in any great detail, I'll just give you 9 points to think about. Yeah, we'll just rip them off in short order here so we don't go over time. 9 facts of history concerning Orthodox Christianity and Gnostic Christianity. Orthodox Christianity won the day. That's very clear. Everybody understands that. people like Elaine Pagels, who want to argue that Gnostic Christianity in all its forms has just as much right to authority as Orthodox Christianity. Even they admit that Orthodox Christianity won. By Orthodox Christianity, we mean what we believe. The Bible's God's Word. Jesus is God in the flesh. He died to pay our sin debt. He rose again bodily. He's going to return. That's Orthodox Christianity. It won. It took over. It squashed its Gnostic competitors. Okay? Now, why did that happen? Elaine Pagels and others want to say, well, Orthodox Christianity was this power-hungry, male-dominating, misogynistic force in the world that just squashed everybody. That's one interpretation. The other interpretation is that Orthodox Christianity reveals truth. It's the truth. It made historical claims that could be verified, and so it's true. That's why it won. Second point is that the New Testament documents are older. Nobody thinks that the four Gospels in the New Testament are later than the first century. Yet everybody accepts that the Gnostic Gospels are later than the New Testament, way later than the New Testament sometimes. Gospel of Thomas, maybe 140 AD, second century, 100 years after Jesus, more than 100 years after. Whereas the canonical Gospels are all written within the same century in which Jesus lived. So the New Testament Gospels are much older. Thirdly, the New Testament Gospels are historic in nature. They are historical in nature. The New Testament Gospels are just giving you what happened. The Gnostic Gospels are not concerned that much with what happened. Gnostic Gospels are concerned with metaphysical statements, strange metaphysical views about reality, instructions on how you can reach enlightenment, and so on. Very little to do with history there. Very little to do with history that you could verify. Okay? Number 4, both a claim to apostolic authority. That's why you have a Gospel of Thomas. That's why you have a Gospel of Philip, and so on. That's why they took names from the New Testament, they attached those names to their Gospels, and they said, there's authority here. Okay? Now, why are they doing that? They're doing that because the canonical Gospels already exist, and they already have the names of apostles attached to them. They're trying to compete with historical Christianity, see? Now, we might say something about this, though. Our New Testament canonical Gospels, older than the Gnostic Gospels, look at the names that are attached. You've got Matthew, who's an apostle, but he's the despised tax collector. Why would you choose him? Why would you choose that guy's name, attach it to an anonymous gospel that you want to use to reach Jews? You wouldn't want to do that. He's not in the inner circle. He's not Peter, James, or John. He's Matthew. He's on the outer edge, and he's the despised tax collector, the traitor. The Jews would have seen him as a traitor. Why would you choose Mark? He's not even an apostle. Why would you choose Luke? He's not an apostle either. Neither of those two guys are an eyewitness. The only thing that makes sense is those names were chosen because those are the real authors. John's Gospel, again, that's a name you might choose, but the internal evidence that John wrote that fourth Gospel is very strong. And we can get into that another time, but it's very strong. We need to know that historically, when scrolls were written, a name tag was attached to the scroll. It's called a sitibos. Sitibos. And it functioned as the spine of a book. And so when the Gospels were first written in scroll form, they would have had that name tag attached to them. And if they didn't have that name tag attached to them, they would be suspect. Tertullian tells us that the author's name should hold its head erect. And he used that in his critique of a proto-Gnostic named Marcion. He says he can't prove who wrote those books. Okay? That explains why nowhere in the Gospel of Matthew does it say, "Hello, my name is Matthew, I'm writing you a gospel." It's because he would have had his name on the name tag, on the scroll originally. Okay? So both claimed apostolic authority. The church appealed to bishop lists and to successions, apostolic succession. Or we should say, not apostolic succession, but leadership succession in the church. It seems to be the case that in the early church in the first century, you had apostles, When the apostles died out, it was elders in the church that took over. Okay? And the elders in the church could be traced back to their apostolic founders. So Irenaeus in Lyon could trace his spiritual ancestry back to John. Polycarp could trace his back to John, and so on. And so the early church, the church in Rome, traced their spiritual ancestry back to Peter. Okay? And the church produced these lists. And as a matter of fact, we had a church historian by the name of Hegesippus who did a research project in the middle of the 2nd century, 150 AD. Hegesippus traveled from the Holy Land right across Asia Minor into Europe all the way to Rome. And he said every church in every city that can claim apostolic succession, or we should say leadership, because the apostles are gone, but any church that could trace its ancestry back to the apostles, they're all in agreement. There is unanimity amongst them in terms of doctrine. Whereas the Gnostics appealed to secret knowledge. They said this was secret knowledge that was passed on orally that we're teaching. The New Testament is very open. Jesus said, I've spoken openly to everybody, not in secret. You can check the things that I'm saying. Point 8 would be the Judas Gospel undercuts the validity of all the other Gnostic Gospels. You know, the Judas Gospel says all the other apostles were idiots. They didn't know anything. Don't listen to them. You listen to Judas only. But what does that do to these other Gnostic Gospels that have attached the name Peter to them? Or Philip? Or Matthew? Or Paul? You know? It undercuts the validity of all those Gospels, doesn't it? And number 9, the Gnostics, particularly Judas, are admitting that the Orthodox Church, and by extension us, we can trace our spiritual and doctrinal position all the way back to the original apostles. They admit it. Judas admits it. It's just that it's too bad the rest of those 11 apostles were a bunch of fools, right? We say, no, they weren't fools. But thanks for admitting that we trace our ancestry back to them. That's very kind of you to do that. And so these 9 points, I think, are very, very important when you're thinking about Gnostic Christianity and whether or not it has just as legitimate a claim to knowledge of original Christianity. I think it doesn't. Our documents are older. The research is there. Our spiritual ancestry is there. It's all there historically for everyone to see. The Gnostic Gospels are in hopeless conflict with each other. They contain details you cannot possibly verify historically. And the Gnostics unwittingly do admit that we can trace our ancestry back to Christ and the original apostles. And I think that's very powerful historical evidence, you know. So there, in very short order, there's your 9 facts of history. And I hope that was helpful to you. And it's 12 noon. Any questions or comments? Yeah.
If it's a Judas Gospel,
Yeah.
and according to the Bible, he hanged himself before Jesus was probably even crucified.
Yeah.
But if the Bible's all wrong, the Judas Gospel was still written after his likely time frame of life would have expired, so it can't be written by him. Is that?
No, I think I'm not even sure if anyone who like the Cainites, for example. There was a group called the Cainites, a Gnostic group. They used the Judas Gospel,
Yeah.
and according to Irenaeus. But I don't think they acknowledge that Jesus killed him, or that Judas killed himself.
Yes, but isn't the date of that Judas Gospel manuscript being written at a point that we believe it would have been written after Judas, even if he had not lived, it would have been after the time frame of his life? Like,
Right.
He couldn't have made it.
I think that's the major issue. That's one of the major issues.
Century.
The original writing of that document comes 2nd century, like something like, I think 130, 140,
Which is
if I recall.
Couldn't have lived that.
Right. It's being penned long after. Even had he died a natural death, he could not have possibly written that thing.
So it immediately, like the name of the book is a fabrication, and so the whole thing is called into significant question.
Right.
Okay.
And for lots of reasons, it's called into question.
But yeah, I'm
for sure.
saying, but they're kind of like dead on arrival.
Right. And that's the problem with all the Gnostic Gospels. We know they're just slapping names on these texts to give them authority,
Yeah.
right? And they're doing that because we have Gospels that everybody believes our Gospels are older. Ours are first century. But a lot of New Testament scholarship wants to affirm that these Gospels were written anonymously and that Orthodox Christianity just slapped some names on them. But going back to my point I made earlier, who in the world would put Matthew's name on there? Why would you put Mark on there? It makes no sense at all. But now after Christianity got established with its 4 Gospels, if you were a rival Gnostic sect, you might take one of those names, now that it's already well-known, established, and authoritative, and you might stick one of those names on one of your Gospels. Sure, why not? Okay? Okay, you with me? Okay, how about a word of prayer, and we'll wrap it up for today. Father God, thank you for this morning that we could come together and think about important things. Lord, help us, God, to be powerful, effective, and in fact, Lord, make us irresistible witnesses to the love, wisdom, and power of our God. We ask you, God, for many fruitful evangelistic and apologetical encounters where we can share the truth of your gospel to people and to defend it adequately and properly. That you'd be glorified in all this and that people would be greatly helped by coming to a saving knowledge of who Jesus Christ really, really is. So, Lord, thank you. Thank you so much for this morning. Please bless and protect every dear student in their homes today. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Praise the Lord.